Okay, so apologies for, this is one of those, who knows WCAG 2 really well here? You know, there are exceptions to certain rules. One of them is a test. So the people that can't see this, I can't explain what it is because this is an exception to the test. Does anyone know who these two guys are? Oh, no, that's not helpful at all. Okay. What's going on? Okay. Anyone know who those guys are? Excellent. So this is Sam and Dean Winchester, and I'm bringing them up because I'm a Supernatural fan, but they are also very well known, and the TV series, the actors are very big on social media, so there's a few things that we kind of use, but I'm using them as an example about why I'm sitting down. So basically I dislocated my toes back in February, believe it or not, and Hollywood would have you believe that, you know, you just snap that dislocation back in and everything's fine. You look a bit sulky for about 30 minutes, and there was actually, you know, a scene where they had to, you know, put someone's shoulder back in. But that's not the case with dislocations. One of the main actors actually dislocated his shoulder, and he was in a sling for 4 months. But on the TV show, he was also in the sling, but they couldn't say it was because he dislocated his shoulder because that was just too wimpy. So they had that he broke his collarbone instead. So that's why I'm sitting down today. I'm a bit croaky because I woke up with a cold this morning. I flew in yesterday. It's a 9-hour flight followed by 1.5 hour layover and then a 15-hour flight. So hopefully I'm making sense. If not, I'll come back and do it again when I'm a little bit better. Can everyone hear me? Yes. Excellent, great. How are you going with the accent? Yeah? Okay, great. So I speak a lot, I travel the world speaking at conferences, which sounds much better than it actually is. And I spoke at Michigan State University, and someone came up to me afterwards and said, "Gosh, I loved your presentation. You know, didn't understand a word you said, but I loved your accent." I'm like, thanks. So please, you know, if you need me to slow down, let me know. Anyway, so a little bit about me and kind of the resources we offer, not in a way of you should buy things from us. Feel free to buy things from us if you want, but we have a whole lot of free resources that we want people to use. I started AccessibilityOz in Australia in 2011, and we opened a US branch in 2015, and we moved into Europe, UK, last year, and I'm part of the Victorian Government delegation for London Tech Week, which is where they're promoting Victorian Government companies here. So when I started AccessibilityOz, this is our team at CSUN in March this year, I wanted to provide employment for people with disabilities as well as providing accessible services. And so throughout the 8 years that we've been operating, I've had staff with a whole variety of different disabilities, including dyslexia, moderate vision impairment, severe vision impairment, epilepsy, migraines, physical impairments, fibromyalgia, multiple sclerosis, Crohn's disease, PTSD and Asperger's. And we do an anonymous survey every year of all my staff, and 60% of my staff identify as having a significant disability that affects their daily life. So there are a lot of things that we do as a company to support people, our employees that have disabilities. One of them is remote working. We have staff in Madrid and Poland. We have staff in the US, as well as providing assistive technologies as needed. A little bit about me, I won't go into this because it's a little bit too much, whoa, how wonderful I am. But I started in AccessibilityOz in 1998, which is a really, really long time ago. I worked on the first accessible website in Australia, and my kind of claim to fame in my first few years of my career was that I spent 6 years with the W3C contributing to WCAG 2. I founded AccessibilityOz in 2011. we have a number of products and services, and I spoke at the United Nations in 2015 on the importance of web accessibility, specifically in emergency situations, because what we found was we had these 2009 bushfires where it was, absolutely catastrophic. 60,000 homes lost, 300 people died, 250,000 wildlife, animals were killed. And it turned out that 47% of people who died were people with disabilities. And they had a Royal Commission into it, and it was one of the things that they didn't actually even talk about in the Royal Commission. So that's what I talked about at the United Nations. So we have offices in Melbourne, Brisbane, Portland, San Francisco, New York, Madrid and Gdansk. And I want to talk a little bit about our service because a lot of them, and products, because a lot of them are free. AusPlayer is our accessible video player. There's only 2 accessible video players in the world. One of them is ours, surprise, surprise, and the other is AblePlayer. Every year I do an analysis and I get people with screen readers and different assistive technologies to test 30-odd video players. The latest results are available on our website, and if you want, say you're using Brightcove or Kaltura or whatever, and you want those results, feel free to email me and I can send them to you. And feel free to say you're wrong and I can prove that I'm right, because I've had a number of organisations come to me and say, you did not find those results, and I'm like, yes I did. OzArt, which is our automated accessibility testing tool, OzWiki, which is our database of accessibility errors, screenshots, code and solutions. And as an attendee of one of my presentations, I'm happy to give you 6 months free access to OzWiki. So if you're interested in that, you do have to give me your email address. Andrew can send that out tomorrow, and these slides will be available. We also have a site called a11yvoices.com, which is a series of blog posts written by people with disabilities about their accessibility experiences. So if you need to go to management and sort of explain why things are important, then that's a great site. And we're always looking for bloggers, and we always pay our bloggers, so reach out to us. And it's a worldwide site. We have a series of accessibility fact sheets on our website, which were commissioned by the Australian government. Which is, why, it's all broken into categories: images, content, coding, JavaScript, forms, etc. Why it's important, what happens if it's not accessible, a series of testing checklists, and a series of developer correct and incorrect code, especially the JavaScript ones. You've got things like accessible progress meters and things like that, which are all available under Creative Commons. So as developers, you can grab that code and use them as you wish. We have an accessible slideshow, which is also available under Creative Commons. If you search for GitHub AccessibilityOz slideshow, you can find it. And we did some work with California community colleges, because we have a $2 million 5-year contract with them, where we developed 16 developer videos, each one under 5 minutes, which is things like, why are HTML headings important, what is ARIA, when not to use ARIA, how to write an error message and things like that. Now, a lot of people here in the room probably know all those things already, but they're a good resource to send out to people who are just learning about accessibility. And I promise that's enough about my company. Okay, so social media. What is social media? So I came across this earlier this year, Social Media Explained. Twitter, I'm eating a donut. Facebook, I like donuts. Foursquare, this is where I eat donuts. Instagram, here is a photo of my donut. YouTube, here I am eating a donut. LinkedIn, my skills include donut eating. Pinterest, here's a donut recipe. Spotify, now listening to donuts. And G+, back when there was a G+. Google+, I'm a Google employee who eats donuts. But one of them is missing, which is Tumblr. So someone added this, which was Tumblr. Here's a picture of a donut replugged with a GIF that somehow pertains to Supernatural, because Tumblr is all about Supernatural. So why is it so important? There are almost 3.4 billion active social media users. On average, people have 5.5 social media accounts. The average time spent on social media is 116 minutes per day, which is huge. 91% of retail brands use 2 or more social media channels, and 81% of small and medium businesses use social media. Now, all these stats if you want to know where they come from, I'm going to send Andrew a link to the presentation with all the links to all the resources, so feel free to have a look at that. There's also some stuff about social media and teenagers. So 81% of teenagers feel more connected to their friends due to social media. 69% believe it helps them interact with a more diverse group of people, which is really important in this day and age. 68% feel as if they have people that will support them in tough times due to their use of social media. And it's important to know that, yes, almost 90% of 18 to 29-year-olds use social media, but almost 80% of people 30 to 49 use social media, 65% of people 50 to 64, and over 35% of people 65 and older use social media as well. So it's not just a young person's game, it's something that is important for all groups of people. In terms of the percentage that use each social media, I don't actually think WhatsApp is a social media network, but feel free to disagree with me. But it goes from WhatsApp at about 22%, and then up to YouTube at about 72, 74%, in the order of WhatsApp, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Pinterest, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. And so the big ones really are Facebook at 68% and YouTube at 72%. And if I haven't convinced you, unemployment of people with disabilities is about 10%, and the percentage of recruiters who use LinkedIn is about 95%. And if you think about people who maybe are in our industry, if you don't have a LinkedIn profile, then that's going to really, make your chances of getting a job difficult. And the percentage of HR managers that have reconsidered hiring a candidate after looking at social media is 55%. So it is really important for all users. And I'm just going to tell you a couple of short stories that I've been gathering in the last 6 months. So in the US, there was the systems, the sites, Uber and Lyft and things like that, kind of were slow to address accessibility needs. Uber was actually in trouble in Australia because they didn't allow, one of the drivers didn't allow a guy with a guide dog to get into the car, and it turned out that that guy with the guide dog was our Disability Discrimination Commissioner. So that was a big mistake on Uber's part. But Lyft approached things a little bit differently. So what happened is there was one person who tweeted at Lyft and said, "Hey, I'm vision impaired. Your product is fantastic in that, I can, I can't hail a cab, but I can order a Lyft, I can order an Uber, but your app is not accessible." And they said, "Well, why don't you come in and tell us what it is that we need to fix?" And so he went there a couple of times and spent a couple of hours talking to them about what they needed to fix with their app, to the point where they said, "You know what? We want to employ you as our accessibility manager." And so now he has a team of people. So that would never have happened if Twitter wasn't accessible to him. Thanksgiving. So I was in the US on Thanksgiving, and it's like everything shuts down in the US. Thanksgiving Day, it's kind of bizarre. And so I spent that time going through my LinkedIn contacts. We were looking for a US salesperson, and just sending them emails, anyone who had sales in their title, would you be interested in this role? And someone responded to me immediately and then asked for my phone number, and we had this 2-hour phone call on Thanksgiving, and I ended up hiring him as a US salesperson. So once again, something that wouldn't have been available if LinkedIn was not accessible. Facebook, in Australia, we're a very small country, and we're kind of a little bit behind. Don't tell anyone I said that. I know we're being recorded. But especially with medical things as well. And there's also a lot of things that are kind of accepted in Australia that are even banned in other areas of the world. And so a friend of mine undertook what's called lap band surgery, and it's actually banned in a number of areas because it's, it causes respiratory problems and malnutrition and things like that. And she had struggled with it her entire, for the 10 years that she had it. She had huge problems with eating and throwing up and things like that. But she was just told over and over again by doctors that, that it was in her head, that it was nothing that she could do. And so it was one day she had enough, and she joined some Facebook groups about people who have lap bands, and she found that all these people were having them removed, and that all the things that doctors had told, was just in her head or was just happening to her were known issues that, were happening across the world and were causing it to be banned in other locations. But the doctors in Australia weren't, having a bar of it. So once again, something else that she would never have learnt if Facebook wasn't available to her. And one thing there is a story about this guy who was watching YouTube videos and he was eating a steak and he started choking on the steak and he was by himself. So while he's choking, he types in, how to do the reverse Heimlich maneuver or by himself, and it found out that what he had to do, he had to bend over a chair to cough out and things like that. So, he obviously lived to tell that tale. But, social media is something that it does change people's lives. A lot of people think that social media is kind of fluff, that it's not really important, but it is. It's really, really important, and it's more important to people with disabilities because often they don't have an opportunity to access information in any other way. So that's why every year I do this analysis of social media. I've been doing it for 4 years, and hopefully, slowly, it's getting a little bit better. So the 5 reasons behind social media use. The first is personal, so creating online commentary of personal thoughts, sharing photos, discussing social events. Work, things like LinkedIn, creating a resume, professional connections, discussing job opportunities. Entertainment, so this is where Supernatural comes in, sharing videos, meta-analysis of episodes, strategies for online games, following celebrities. And then you've got provision of goods and services, so sharing information about a product, responding to user feedback about a product, accessing government services. So, for example, I do a lot of flying, and there's a flight that's 12 minutes long from Canberra to Sydney. And there are always these tiny little planes, and you deplane onto the tarmac. And so we deplaned onto the tarmac, and it was 38 degrees. Do you guys work in Celsius here? Yeah, 38 degrees Celsius. It was really, really hot. And so about 100 feet away was an open door to the terminal, and so we all went towards it, and the people were like, oh no, you're not allowed to go into that door, that's not authorised. We have to wait for the terminal door to be opened. And so we waited, and it's 38 degrees, and thank you. And it's hot, and I'm missing a meeting, but I'm also getting sunburnt, and we're standing. It's not pleasant. So after about 40 minutes, I tweaked to Virgin Australia, which was the airline, and I said, not sure why we're standing in 38 degree heat when there's an open door, 50, 100 feet away. And it's still on the AccessibilityOz Twitter, if you want to go look for it, a few years old now. And there was no response from Virgin Australia, but 5 minutes later, people came out of that door and ushered us through. So, it's amazing how the way you can reach out to people via social media, especially big companies, in a way that you couldn't before. And education, so online classes, sharing learning resources, etc., etc. So, okay, why isn't social media accessible? This is the main reason. If you ever have 30 seconds to tell someone why social media is not accessible, this is the reason. So a few years back, Facebook changed something where all of a sudden code was showing up in their their headers. So here it says span class quo, why sacrifice yourself, whistleblowers, blah, blah, blah. And it's not like everyone got together and said, hey, let's put code in our headings in Facebook. Facebook changed a feature and the code started showing up. Now, most people picked that up immediately, but Crikey, which is like an alternative newspaper in Australia, didn't. And for about 2 weeks, they had code in their headings like this. Facebook changes up to 5 times a day. And the last time I actually managed to get anyone from social media to talk to me, I learnt, and this is probably why they won't talk to me anymore, I learnt that they don't actually have testing teams. What they do is they deploy their updates to their internal team, which might be 10,000 people. And then those people actually log bugs, and then they fix the bugs, and then they deploy it to the general population. So what's wrong with that? If you don't have any staff with using screen readers or reliant just on a keyboard or anything like that, then you're never going to pick up those accessibility issues. And even if they have changed, and a lot of the social media networks have accessibility teams, but we're talking 5 or 10 people, more like 5. They don't have the time or the resources to check everything as it goes out. And so because these systems change so rapidly, even if they manage to make something accessible today, it could be easily gone tomorrow. So that is why it's really, really important to sort of have an underlying belief that social media is inaccessible and that therefore approach it that way. So for example, I did this. I've actually started doing social media testing twice a year instead of once a year, because it changes so often. So this keyboard trap, for example, if you tab to this vertical ellipsis on a video on YouTube, if you activated it, the tab takes you to the first option, not interested, and the next tab takes the user to the address bar. So it's basically a keyboard trap type behaviour. And it was there for about 3 months, and then it was gone. So they do change very quickly. So in 2017 in LinkedIn, we had a button here that was completely unlabelled. In 2018, the button was labelled, but it was labelled button IP 24 DP button. I mean, I don't even know where that came from, right? And then in 2019, the button's just gone. So, you know, these things change all the time. So, okay, now I'll get to the actual testing. What was tested? Standard user journey, register, so actually registering as a new user, log in, read items, submit an item, and add any accessibility features that might be available. The user functionality was keyboard only, increased text size, and using a screen reader. And I'm a very big believer in having people who are vision impaired do our screen reader testing. If you're not vision impaired and you're using a screen reader, then you're going to have a very different experience. So we have a screen reader tester who's completely vision impaired, and he does all the testing for this, as well as the video player testing as well. We tested against some major WCAG 2 things, like, you know, form labels and headings and stuff like that, but it was not a full audit. The networks in 2016, 17 and 18, we did Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube and Twitter. And 2019, I added Instagram and Pinterest. Next year, I'll do Tumblr, I promise. But it took 3 years of people saying, do Instagram and Pinterest before I did actually do them. And so please note, it's not a complete audit. It's more just we found things that I suppose are accessibility 101 things, and things that would really trip a user up. What is going on? Okay, so first was keyboard accessibility. Now, I know that's terribly unfriendly, but the slides are fully accessible, I promise, so you can grab them. But basically, there was a keyboard trap in Pinterest. Pinterest and Twitter were not accessible to the keyboard. The right-hand column was not keyboard accessible in Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter and YouTube. There was not a valid keyboard focus indicator in Pinterest and Twitter. and there was not a valid keyboard focus order in Instagram or YouTube. So we found that when you first register on Pinterest, you get this more ideas for your board, photography, explore, and that actually was a keyboard trap. So you couldn't go any further than that. And it remained there for several logins. Instagram, this is an example of issues with keyboard focus order. So the keyboard focus order starts at the beginning of the actual actual section, and so things like the Instagram, the profile, etc., is not accessible to the keyboard. What we found a lot is that Twitter, that the right-hand column, in a lot of them, the right-hand column is not accessible to the keyboard because we found that the centre column had infinite scrolling. So basically you just keep loading more content and more content and more content. Facebook addressed this by providing really detailed skip links, so you could skip to that particular section. But infinite scrolling is fairly inaccessible. Autoplay. So we found that there was autoplay on default viewing for desktop, Facebook, LinkedIn, Pinterest, Twitter, and YouTube. And on iOS, it occurred on absolutely everything. Now, autoplay is a known WCAG 2 violation. It's a serious issue, and it will make the system completely inaccessible. And then on top of that, the video could not be paused by the mouse on Pinterest. It could not be paused by the keyboard on Pinterest or Twitter. And it could not be paused by touch on Instagram or Pinterest. And so this is Twitter. Twitter actually used to do really, really well, and then they just, I don't know what happened. They lost their accessibility team or something. That basically autoplay, and then the video was not available to the keyboard, so no one could pause the autoplay. And there's also, a lot of people talk about the ability to turn off autoplay in settings. You couldn't do that on desktop, Pinterest or YouTube, or not properly. And you couldn't do that on iOS, on Instagram, Pinterest or YouTube. And so I know people are like, hey, there's that little button that says you can turn off autoplay but on YouTube, but the fact is that there's infinite scrolling in the comments. So if you're looking at a video that has 10,000 comments, you can never get to the right-hand column to actually turn off the autoplay. The autoplay itself doesn't have a keyboard focus indicator. Last year it wasn't accessible to the keyboard. Page titles and headings. LinkedIn, Pinterest didn't have unique or descriptive page titles. Facebook didn't have a reference to the site in terms of page titles. And so LinkedIn is the page title on home, LinkedIn is the page title on messaging, and this can be really confusing to screen reader users. Facebook page title has no reference to the site, so the page title was just the name of the Facebook group. Headings. None of them had properly nested headings. LinkedIn, Pinterest, Twitter and YouTube had content coded as a heading. Only LinkedIn had all headings coded appropriately with H1, H2, H3. Only Facebook had all pages start with an H1. And Pinterest had some pages without headings at all. So this is an example of content coded as a heading. Choose the thumbnail that best represents your video. To be able to add custom thumbnails, your account needs to be verified and in good standing. And so that's actually coded as a heading, which can be really confusing to screen readers. So more like this heading in Pinterest, wonderful little div class, as opposed to an H1. I didn't find any class equals headings, but give them time. On this particular page, the only headings are under the little plus and question mark sign, so not referring to the page at all. Inaccessible forms. All of them had fields not coded with label for an ID. Instagram and LinkedIn were the only ones that had field sets with appropriately coded legends. Facebook, Instagram and Twitter were the only ones that didn't have orphaned or multiple field labels, and Twitter and YouTube didn't have properly coded radio buttons. And so this is your, create account on Facebook, and none of it was coded with appropriate field labels. And then we found incorrect use of ARIA and HTML. So invalid ARIA in everything except for Instagram and Pinterest. Inaccessible iframes on everything. JavaScript links on Facebook and YouTube. Empty links on everything except LinkedIn. And missing mandatory attributes on everything except Instagram. And the screen reader. We found, so we did it a little bit differently. A cross meant that they couldn't complete the task at all. An exclamation mark meant they could, but it took them a really, really long time. And this is a very expert screen reader. So couldn't register on Facebook or Instagram at all, and the rest were all really difficult to use. Login was really difficult on Facebook, the others were fairly easy. It was impossible to create a post on Pinterest. Everything else was very difficult. And it was very difficult to read a post with accessibility features on Facebook, Twitter and YouTube. And that was desktop, and this is iOS. The only ones where register was easily done was LinkedIn and Twitter. Couldn't do it at all on Instagram or Pinterest. Facebook was very hard. Login was difficult on YouTube, the others were okay. Could not create a post with accessibility features on Pinterest. It was difficult on Facebook and YouTube, and it was quite difficult to read a post with accessibility features on YouTube. And the last thing is inconsistency, and inconsistency is a AA requirement, but it's very helpful in terms of making things accessible. And we saw a lot of inconsistency in visuals, in default operation, in functionality and in settings, and it didn't go into this in a lot in the testing. But so for example, on the left, you've got 4 icons, and 3 of them are the same as on desktop, but one of them's different. And so all of a sudden does that mean it's doing something different? Or, who knows? Default operation. So basically the videos autoplay on Instagram on iOS, but they don't on desktop. And you can't upload a photo to Instagram on desktop at all. You can only do it on iOS. And functionality. So the sharing is kind of sharing with in Instagram is sharing with your friends, whereas on desktop it's actually sharing to different social media networks. And settings, so whether videos can autoplay, image descriptions, etc., were completely different whether you were working on desktop or iOS. So there was also a lot of use of ARIA instead of HTML, which is just a really bad idea. HTML is natively accessible, and ARIA should only be used when you can't use HTML. There were also reCAPTCHAs that were triggered, and reCAPTCHAs are not accessible despite what Google says. And there are a lot of colour contrast issues as well. So basically the 5 steps to making sure social media is accessible, knowing that, basically one thing to take out of all that information is that there was never one social media network that was fully accessible. Some were good in some ways and some were good in others. And that's with people with disabilities, they're going to prefer one social media network over another. So the first thing is to make your contact information available on your social media account page. List a primary phone number and email address where a user can reach your agency with questions, and provide a link to your agency website. Repeat content, so this is really important. If you have 3 social media accounts, then all your content needs to go to all 3 social media accounts. Provide options for daily digests where you can send emails out of the content that you've sent out, or even weekly digests or things like that. Provide easy points of entry. So if you've got on social media that there's a competition to win an iPad, then that information kind of needs to be on your homepage. It can't be buried in your site somewhere, and multiple outlets. And also put your social media content on your site. Provide alternative apps, so provide contact details to social media support and accessibility teams within your organisation. Provide links to social media accessibility tips and support, and the link that I'm going to send out actually has links to how to use YouTube with a screen reader, etc., because they're not easy to find. Provide links to alternative apps and websites that create an accessible interface for social media. Use clear and simple language. So use camel case, so capitalise the first letter of every word in a hashtag. Avoid abbreviations, limit hashtags, add them only to the end. Avoid misspellings, and when you link to others' content, you need to warn about the lack of transcripts, captions and audio descriptions. And also consider testing your social media with users with disabilities and against WCAG too, and actually reaching out to those social media networks and saying, hey, your stuff is not accessible. You know, if Sainsbury's says that to them, that's probably going to they might take notice of that more than, me doing this testing each year. So very quickly, there's some Facebook tips. Alternative text to images, transcripts of videos, load videos to YouTube and add captions there. There are alternative methods to the desktop interface that are much more accessible. Facely HD on iOS, m.facebook.com and Metal on Android. Instagram, alternative text to images, burn captions into your videos so they're open. Be careful of colour contrast in your images if you're conveying information. LinkedIn, add alternative text, ensure your profile has a clear image. Search for contacts using Google, do not use the LinkedIn search, and do not use the LinkedIn mail system. Pinterest, identify your content as pic, video, or audio. Once saved, you can edit the pin and add a description and burn captions into your videos. Alternative text for Twitter, use camel case and their accessibility tips. Sorry, I'm very aware that I'm running out of time. And there are alternative methods, Easy Chirp, Twitterific, Metal on Android. YouTube, warn users of the autoplay, make sure there's a transcript, captions and audio descriptions. And there are alternative methods to the desktop interface, the accessible interface to YouTube, accessible YouTube and access YouTube. Or you host your videos on YouTube and use a player like OzPlayer or AblePlayer to play them on your site. And one thing I forgot to mention was that OzPlayer is actually free for not-for-profits that have an annual revenue under $1 million, and also for personal use or for sites that have less than 10 videos. We're also half price for not-for-profits that are over that or educational institutions. And that's it. So sorry, that presentation was initially an hour and a half and I thought I got it down, but apparently I didn't get it down enough. So thank you very much. Thank you for listening. Do we have time for questions?
Yeah, we've got 5 minutes, I think.
Okay, excellent. Any questions?
I got a couple inside it, but yeah, come here back. Thank you very much, by the way, first of all. Have a drink.
Yeah. I think my voice held out pretty well, actually. Yeah.
Sure. All right.
Thanks very much. I found that really, really interesting. There's been a few kind of high-profile court cases, I guess, especially in the US, about accessibility. So why is it that social media sites continue to get away with not providing accessible sites to kind of this extent when it's so prolific across so many different metrics?
So there's two reasons. One, they don't care. They're big enough that they don't care. They feel that they are meeting their accessibility requirements by having an accessibility team, but that accessibility team often doesn't have much authority. The people that work in those accessibility teams are fantastic people, but if they don't have any authority, then there's nothing they can do. Secondly, in the US, I'm not sure about here, but also in Australia, if you put content out on social media and it's not accessible because the social media network is not accessible, then you are liable, not the social media network. So if you put stuff out on Facebook and it's not accessible because Facebook's not accessible, they're not going to sue Facebook, they're going to sue you. And so I really do believe in the power of litigation. It's a very unpopular opinion to have, but the reason why the US is leading the world in terms of accessibility compliance is because of the litigation. And yes, there are some drive-by lawsuits, but most of the time they're serious issues. And we've seen in Australia, without litigation, nothing really happens. And in the US, because people are getting sued and settling out of court for millions of dollars, that it is something that people realise they need to put money into. Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi, thanks for the talk. I think my questions are similar to that, but more from a developer point of view. If I was a developer working at one of these companies, how can we encourage the management of the company to invest time and money to allow us to make the changes necessary to make the website accessible?
Yeah, so sorry, what was the question?
So I'm a developer working at a company similar to these. What I find is that they don't really give us the time necessary to sort of provide auditing and make the websites accessible.
Yeah.
So how can we just encourage them that it's a priority and that we need the time to make them work?
So the W3C has some good stuff about business case, return on investment, but also things like the BBC have done a lot of stuff on this as well, especially around things like captions. They find that 80% of people who use captions are not deaf or hard of hearing, and that there's a whole, and I've written an article on accessibility of video, which talks about how you know, the completion of a video doubles if it has captions. A site earns 16% more revenue if its video has captions. Google, you know, references videos higher than text. So that's all obviously video. But there is a real return on investment, and there's also a report by Centre for Inclusive Design, which is an Australian company, on like the money that you make by making stuff accessible. So I can send that to Andrew and send that round. They did a lot of work, and it was with, you know, some big like companies like Accenture and things like that to figure out exactly, maybe it was KPMG, to figure out exactly what would happen if everything was accessible, and they figured out that there'd be like $2 billion more in the tourist industry and stuff like that. And I think that when you're working in a company, there's two ways to explain it to management. And it's always around money. Either you make more money because it's accessible, or you risk being sued and losing money if it's not accessible. And I don't know what the litigation, state is here, but it's more likely you'll kind of get there with, saying, hey, we'll have more users and things like that. Yeah.
Thank you.
There is a European Accessibility Act that came into effect. But I haven't seen it really kind of push people to do the right thing. Yeah.
Hello. Thank you for that. Just wanted to talk to the previous couple of questions. I am an engineer at Twitter. Do quite a lot of the
I'm sorry.
minimal. No, it is fine. It is all true. Just to answer the question, internal advocacy is really the only thing you can do. Just keep pushing and trying and talking. And we are finally getting through a little bit. But yeah, there's not a lot you can do.
Twitter was fantastic. It was fantastic until about a year ago.
About a year ago, we started working on a new version, which is about to be released, which is a lot better than the old version. I hope. We'll find out. But
yeah.
Yes. But,
Feel free. Look, I'd love to get your details, because one of the things that I do before I do the social media testing is reach out to them and say, each of them, and say, hey, I'd like to talk to you. So maybe I can say this is in the pipeline, or these are the links that, how to use it with a screen reader or whatever. And I have been met mostly with silence. So it'd be great if I could, have a chat to you, and even if I can tell you, and if nothing official can happen, but you at least know what's happening. Yeah.
Thank you.
Great.
Okay, I think we'll need to call it a day there. If you have any questions, we can contact you.
Yeah, I'll be around.